Good evening. Thanks for joining us today. The President of the United States used the enormous power of his office to lean on some of the top officials in charge of enforcing the law and investigating him. There are a lot of new details tonight on the President's White House meeting with FBI Director Chris Wray, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and Dan Coats, who's the Director of National Intelligence, and all that led up to it, including the deal it ended with. The question being, did the President himself blink? Before we get to that, let's just take a look at what this incident, however it turns out, amounts to. Because keeping them honest, we know what this is. We've seen this before from President Trump, his surrogates and supporters whenever Special Counsel Robert Mueller makes a move or some other damaging story hits the President. So here are the immediate details. Late today, the President met with Wray, Rosenstein, and Coats about his demand that the Justice Department investigate whether the FBI infiltrated or surveilled his campaign. And though it was scheduled a while back, this meeting, it followed this tweet yesterday from the President. I hereby demand, and will do so officially tomorrow, that the Department of Justice look into whether or not the FBI, DOJ, infiltrated or surveilled the Trump campaign for political purposes, and if any such demands or requests were made by people within the Obama administration. Now, the meeting ended with Deputy Attorney General, according to the White House, agreeing to a concession that he'd floated yesterday to expand the current Inspector General's probe of FBI and DOJ conduct to include the President's concerns. Here's how the Vice President responded to that concession.
The President, I think, is grateful that the Department of Justice is going to have the Inspector General look into it and determine and ensure that there was no surveillance done for political purposes against our campaign.
Sir Sanders also said, quote, it was also agreed that White House Chief of Staff Kelly will immediately set up a meeting with the FBI, DOJ, and DNI, together with congressional leaders to review highly classified and other information they've requested. Keeping them honest, though, the claim of a spy within the Trump campaign comes with, as of yet, little or nothing to back it up, and plenty to raise suspicions about its validity, including the central role of someone the President went out of his way to praise today.
And a very courageous man. He's courageous. Congressman Devin Nunes. Thank you very much, Devin, for being here. Appreciate it.
So he is, of course, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, and for weeks now, he's been seeking information on a top-secret intelligence source who reportedly contacted two Trump campaign advisors and one official, including Carter Page, who was already under suspicion for contacts with Russia, and George Papadopoulos, whose drunken boasting about getting Russian dirt on the Clinton campaign reportedly triggered the FBI investigation in the first place. According to the Washington Post, senior FBI and intelligence officials warned that providing the information could jeopardize the source, and at least at that point, the President agreed. Then, some right-wing media got a hold of the story. On May 10th, an op-ed ran in the Wall Street Journal titled, About That FBI Source, Did the Bureau Engage in Outright Spying Against the 2016 Trump Campaign? That same day, Rush Limbaugh talked about a spy in the campaign, also citing Devin Nunes. And 2 days later, the National Review's Andrew McCarthy wrote, and I'm quoting here, from painstaking research, Nunes and committee staff believe they've identified such a spy. Then last week, the New York Times did some very careful reporting, clearly not labeling this source as a spy sent to surveil the campaign, which Breitbart News promptly misrepresented under this headline. Quote, leakers to New York Times confirm FBI ran spy operation against Trump campaign. So that was last Wednesday, and by then the President was pretty much off and running, tweeting the next morning and citing Andrew McCarthy, saying, wow, word seems to be coming out that the Obama FBI spied on the Trump campaign with an embedded informant. Andrew McCarthy says there's probably no doubt that they had at least one confidential informant in the campaign. If so, this is bigger than Watergate. By this weekend, he was making demands on the Justice Department. The Justice Department was acceding to them, and late today, his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, told Politico the Department of Justice memos about the informant should also be made available to the President's legal team on a confidential basis, as he said. He told USA Today, quote, I think they could help us if they show there's no original basis for the investigation. Yet he also told the paper that his client called the meeting to demand the documents, not in his capacity as the potential subject of an investigation, but in his official capacity as president. Now, keeping him honest, the President has been here before, and Devin Nunes has been here before as well.
Today, I briefed the President on the concerns that I had about incidental collection and how it relates to President-elect Trump and his transition team and the concerns that I have.
Well, that was back in March of 2017. As we later found out, he'd briefed the President on information that he'd gotten the day before from the White House. There was no substance to it, but for a while, the President was calling it the real scandal and demanding it become a focus of the investigation. President rage tweeted about it, but he never went quite as far about that as he did today. More now on all this from CNN's Jim Acosta, who joins us at the White House. What more do we know about the president's meeting today?
Well, Anderson, we do know that officials were telling us before this happened that this was a pre-scheduled meeting, but it seems that when the meeting happened with the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, the FBI Director Chris Wray, and the Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats, that this was primarily about this demand that the president issued over the weekend, which a lot of people thought, I guess that was somewhat disconcerting that the president would say, I hereby demand that this happen. But of course, as you know, Anderson, this is par for the course over here at the White House. But despite some pearl clutching here in Washington, the president essentially got what he wanted. And after this meeting was wrapped up, the White House put out a statement saying that essentially the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, is going to be setting up this meeting at the end of the week. We understand it's going to be at the end of the week, involving some of these various officials and key lawmakers like the House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes. They're going to be given the opportunity to review some classified information, which, by the way, we should point out, a senior administration official said Devin Nunes was invited to review some of this material last week, and he did not respond to that invitation. But apparently he's going to get that opportunity to do that this week. Anderson, I should also point out the president just wrapped up a meeting with a group of governors here at the White House. I tried to ask a question about Rod Rosenstein in this meeting that happened earlier today, and the president did not respond to the question. And they seemed pretty eager for us to get out of the room because a Secret Service agent tugged on my arm to pull us and the rest of the press corps out of there.
Well, today was another day that the White House did not have a briefing. Have they given an explanation as to why?
No explanation why. They were taking our questions and our calls throughout the day, as they often do, but there was no reason, I don't think, why they shouldn't have had a briefing today. The president did speak over at the CIA. Sometimes they say, you know, when the president is speaking, they want that message to carry the day. But Anderson, we are seeing, and this may become a trend, it's not certain as of yet, where we're seeing fewer and fewer briefings. There were only 2 last week. And on Friday, for example, Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, did not hold a briefing, but somehow she had enough time to go on Sean Hannity for a pre-taped interview in the evening. She had time to do that, but not to give us a briefing, and there wasn't one today, Anderson.
All right, Jim Acosta at the White House, thanks very much. On Capitol Hill, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley has joined the call for information on the Russia probe. In a letter to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, he requested former Associate Deputy Attorney General Bruce Orr's communications with Christopher Steele, who wrote that Russia dossier. Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal also serves on the committee, and he joins us now. Thanks for being with us. How do you read the Justice Department is asking the Inspector General now to look into the FBI and the Department of Justice tactics concerning the Trump campaign?
It's a concession to the president, a potentially dangerous concession.
How so dangerous? How so?
Well, number one, the president is obviously trying to interfere with an investigation. It happens to be an investigation of him. And so it's a threat and potential intimidation. Number two, there is no factual support. You said there wasn't a lot of facts to back it up. That's a charitable way of looking at it. There is simply no evidence to support an investigation. The FBI was conducting a counterintelligence investigation against Russian attempts to interfere with our election. In fact, they warned the Trump campaign about that effort to interfere with the Trump campaign and the Clinton campaign well before any of this stuff happened. And so the precedent is very dangerous that an investigation will be launched simply because a president wants to stop an investigation.
There are some, I mean, do you see this as Rod Rosenstein capitulating to the president or sort of buying time for the Mueller investigation? I mean, if there's no there, what's wrong with having the Inspector General look into it and, settle it once and for all?
That's a really important point, Anderson. There is no there, and so all of this is likely to be seen eventually as a sideshow. The Mueller investigation is proceeding, grinding along, bringing indictments and seeking and obtaining convictions. But the point here is that the principle of the objectivity and independence of the Department of Justice has been compromised. It's a face-saving bone to the president, but it has larger implications.
The second thing that came out of this meeting is that Chief of Staff Kelly is going to meet with the FBI, the Justice Department, the DNI, with congressional leaders to review intelligence, highly classified and other information. Does that concern you? I mean, is that appropriate?
I'm very concerned that information relating to a covert agent and informant may be made public. and some of it, unfortunately, already has. There are criminal penalties against that kind of disclosure. 10 years in prison is the punishment. But our credibility around the world, depending on our ability to keep secrets, is very much at risk here. And there was a similar meeting last week, just as the Inspector General investigation already is ongoing. So the change here is not all that dramatic, but the disclosure of any of this classified information could be extremely damaging.
I mean, the New York Times is reporting that this was not a spy within the Trump campaign spying on the Trump campaign, that this was a person, an asset to meet with George Papadopoulos and Carter Page. I think Sam Clovis, according to the Washington Post, was the third person. Does that, I mean, I could understand from Trump supporters why they're suspicious of the deep state, and why should they take the word of what the New York Times has reported or what others have said?
There's no reason for them to take anybody's word. There is simply no evidence that that informant or agent acting covertly, seeking information about Russian interference in the campaign, was anything more than that kind of informant, not a spy, not conducting infiltration or surveillance. But ultimately, there will be no there, and I think that the Inspector General investigation will vindicate that part of the investigation.
The president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, has been claiming that the Mueller team hopes to wrap things up, their investigation, by September 1st. Again, that only comes from Rudy Giuliani. You can, viewers can take that for whether they think that's credible or not. Does it make sense to you that Mueller would be able to wrap up by then?
You know, Anderson, when I was a federal prosecutor, I would often ask my agents or assistant attorneys general to complete an investigation by a date certain. And their response to me, quite rightly, was, we'll do our best, but we need to follow the facts and the law. And that's what the special counsel is doing. If he sets an arbitrary deadline, and I have a lot of skepticism that he would have used Rudy Giuliani as his spokesman, even if he were going to do it.
You think this might be a Giuliani trying to put pressure, public pressure, on Mueller?
More likely than not, that's exactly what it is.
When the president tweeted out that I hereby demand the DOJ look into the FBI, did that language, I mean, concern you as a former attorney general? I mean, he does have the constitutional authority to really, I mean, he has wide constitutional authority.
He has constitutional authority to ask the Department of Justice to investigate. It's the circumstances here that are so concerning. Number one, no factual predicate. You know, when an FBI agent begins an investigation, they sit down and they do a form that says, here's the factual predicate and the potential illegality involved. Or they tell their superior, the special agent in charge, what is the violation of law here? What's the factual predicate? Again, no evidence whatsoever except what is going through the president's mind. That's one dangerous point. But also, we've been through some dark eras where officials asked or directed investigations without any factual basis, simply on suspicion or for political motives. And I'm afraid that's what's happening here.
Do you believe the credibility of the Department of Justice, the FBI, is being permanently harmed?
I think it has been harmed. I say that with great sadness. And I've spoken on the floor of the Senate to say that there are dedicated, hardworking people working the FBI day in, day out. They make cases, they put their lives in danger, and the president's continual, consistent, relentless attack on this agency has had some effect. But I think we can rebuild that credibility. When I say we, it's on us as public officials to speak out, and my Republican colleagues as well. The Republican Party, used to be the law and order party. This is about our public safety. When an FBI agent goes to talk to a potential witness, and he or she has heard the President of the United States attacking the FBI, it undermines that agent's ability to do his or her job.
Senator Blumenthal, appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Coming up next, Was the President Played? We'll tell you what a conservative Republican ally of his says about the deal that the senator a moment ago called a face-saving bone thrown to the president. The panel weighs in as well. And later, an update on some stunning pictures today. Look at this lava spewing from a volcanic fissure on Hawaii's Big Island. Before the break, you heard a Democratic senator weigh in against the president's demand on the Justice Department. Moments ago, his Republican colleague, Jeff Flake, had this to say: it's not appropriate, it really isn't. How DOJ responds will tell if we're in a crisis or not. So far, it's held. As for one of the leaders of the conservative House Freedom Caucus, his take seems to be that the Deputy Attorney General put one over on the president. Congressman Mark Meadows tweeting, Rod Rosenstein knows exactly what happened and what is in the documents requested by Congress. Either the matter warranted investigation long ago and he did nothing, or he's seen the facts and believes nothing is wrong. His belated referral to the IG is not news, it is a ruse. Here to talk about is Gloria Borger, Phil Mudd, and Carrie Cordero. It is interesting, both sides seem to think this is not appropriate. I mean, you have Senator Blumenthal saying he worries about this precedent it set of the IG now being basically pressured into looking into this. And I think from the president's supporters, they're saying the president got played.
Right. I mean, conservatives like Meadows. I mean, I talked to a conservative attorney involved in all of this today who said, look, this is just sweeping it under the rug because the inspector general, A, will take a while, and B, doesn't have subpoena power. So they're saying, how are you ever going to get to the bottom of this? And they believe that Rosenstein was just trying to diffuse this, maybe save his job, and that the president eventually will get frustrated.
So, I mean, Phil, you've worked in the FBI and the CIA. Is there precedent for this? I mean, you now have this investigation from the inspector general being expanded, and you have Chief of Staff Kelly going to be going through some classified information with folks from the FBI, the DOJ, the DNI, and also congressional leaders.
Yeah, sure. But I remember talking to Vice President Cheney back years ago before the Iraq War when he was coming over to the CIA headquarters saying, what's the intelligence you have? What's the connection between al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein? So there is precedent for political involvement. I think the interesting story here, and Gloria alluded to this, is timing. Mm-hmm. This is really fascinating from inside Washington. So this might look like the Deputy Attorney General and the FBI Director sort of capitulated. Mm-hmm. What's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 months? I would speculate that Mueller is going to come up with some of the final stages of the investigation. If he goes where I think he's going to go, which is indictments that get closer to the White House, this issue falls by the wayside.
So you think Rosenstein is buying time for Mueller?
Yes, he's punting, buying time. Look at the alternative. He says no. What does the president do? More evidence that there's collusion against me, not me against the Russians. More evidence that they rolled over on Hillary Clinton. What was his option? To say no might have torpedoed the investigation, Anderson.
Kerry, I mean, do you have any doubt that, there's that folks on Capitol Hill, the president's allies, they're not going to ratchet down their attempts to obtain information from the FBI, the DOJ. They're going to have these meetings with Kelly. Do you have any doubt there? I mean, are they acting as private investigators on behalf of the president?
Well, it really looks a lot like there is coordination between the White House and some of his allies on Capitol Hill to get access to information. I'm going to disagree with Phil a little bit in terms of I think there's a big difference between Vice President Cheney asking for intelligence information in the context of making national security decisions and the White House today making demands about investigations that need to be expanded based on an investigation that targets individuals or has subjects who are individuals who are affiliated with the campaign and who has interviewed many people affiliated with the White House. So this investigation, I think, is very different than a national security activity. With respect to the Justice Department's referral to the Inspector General, there is no underestimating the extent to which an Inspector General potentially can be disruptive to ongoing investigative activities. And so while I understand why the Deputy Attorney General went ahead and handled things in this way by saying, you know what, we're going to have the IG expand their look into whether or not there was any inappropriate political influence, I am worried that then that causes IG investigators, who are they going to be interviewing and who are they going to be investigating? They're going to be investigating the FBI. And that is disruptive to ongoing operations if there's not a real reason to do it.
Just one quick, and Kerry's right. I confess I'm wrong on this one. But on the point of the IG, that's right. People who look at this as sweeping this under the rug have never dealt with the IG.
That's right.
The IG is a sledgehammer. When they came after us, when I was at the Bureau, if they're investigating you, they will find something wrong. It's like looking at an hour of an Anderson Cooper program and saying, was there ever 30 seconds that didn't go completely right? They're going to find something wrong.
Look at what happened with Andrew McCabe. Yeah. I mean, these are serious investigations that take a while. And so, there's a question. The president wants an answer tomorrow. And that isn't going to happen.
Does, this whole thing of what's happened with this confidential informant, the president's, alleging he's a spy targeted at the campaign, does it hurt other confidential informants who cooperate with the FBI or with the CIA who feel like, well, wait a minute, am I going to get blown?
Yeah, of course. If you walk into somebody, and remember, political corruption is part of the fundamentals of what the FBI does. Forget about the president. It's a city council in a city across America where one of the city council members is saying, I'm going to give you a contract because you're a friend of the family. What do you do tomorrow if you're the FBI agent running that investigation? You say, I guarantee you we can protect your identity. One other issue, and nobody has asked this question. I want to know the answer. Is the FBI or somebody else, at the request of this individual who's been now identified in other venues, is the FBI, because of what the president has done, providing that person security? Because that guy, I guarantee you, is at risk today. The president put that individual at risk because of
At risk from whom, though?
Oh, Anderson, how much hate mail do you get? I'm a low-budget, third-rate CNN commentator, and I get hate mail of people saying, I want to hurt you. Here's my cell phone number. I'm going to beat the crap out of you. What do you think this guy's going to get? And who's responsible now because of what the president has done is to protect him? I want an answer. Who now is providing protection as a result of the president has done? And I bet it's the U.S. government.
Well, and this is such a different scenario because in the past, people in the FBI or the Justice Department or the intelligence community, they're used to the media, for example, trying to dig at information and trying to, find out sources and trying to dig behind investigations. What's different this time is that the impetus to out this individual is coming from the White House and congressional overseers.
Not just the White House, I mean the President of the United States.
The President of the United States. And so to the extent that the DNI, for example, who was supposedly in this meeting today, whose statutory role is to protect sources and methods, to protect classified information, I would think that the DNI would have something to say about this exposure of this confidential
And if you want to be
source.
conspiratorial about it, you could say this is a way for the president to push and push and push Rosenstein and push Wray till one of them decides they can't deal with it anymore and just quits.
Gloria Borger, Phil Mudd, Gary Cordero, thanks very much. Much more ahead. We're going to dig into the legal questions about the president's demand that the investigators be investigated. Jeff Toobin and Alan Dershowitz join us next to sort that out. There are multiple legal questions to get into tonight surrounding the president's demand that the Justice Department look into whether there was FBI or DOJ surveillance of his campaign for political purposes, as he said. A demand, in essence, that the investigators be investigated. And just like that, the phrase constitutional crisis has been popping up again. CNN chief legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin has a new piece in The New Yorker about whether the fervor to impeach the president will start a democratic civil war. He joins us now, along with Professor Alan Dershowitz, author of Trumped Up, How Criminalization of Political Differences Endangers Democracy. Jeff, is there anything illegal about what the president is asking the Justice Department to do?
I don't think it's illegal, but I do think it's a violation of the norms that have been in effect for decades in terms of how the president deals with the FBI. We have a system in place where the president, though he is the head of the executive branch, allows the investigative functions of the FBI to function independently. This is especially true when the president is the subject of the investigation. It's entirely inappropriate for what the president's doing, but I think it's legal.
Professor Dershowitz, I mean, there may not be anything illegal or unconstitutional about the president ordering this investigation. It does go against decades of how presidents have conducted themselves. Would you agree?
Well, decades may be overstating it. It's certainly gone against some years. I mean, obviously, early in our history, Jefferson, Lincoln, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, John Kennedy, all instructed the Justice Department who to investigate, who not to investigate. But let's start with the end. I think an investigation is warranted. Whether the president was right in asking for it or not is a different question. Whenever any undercover agent gets close to a political campaign, it's worthy of an investigation. Remember, you need no probable cause to put an informer in a campaign. There's no judicial oversight, and there is the risk, the possibility that it may be done for an improper purpose, or the agent may become an agent provocateur. It's worth an investigation. If it turns out there's nothing there, fine. Let's be reassured that there was nothing there. But I think doing an investigation by the Inspector General is a good thing. I do agree with Jeffrey that it would be better if it didn't come in a self-serving way from the president, though what the president did was perfectly legal and consistent with the role of a unitary executive who is also the head of the Justice Department, but it does fly in the face of at least very recent tradition.
But let's be clear. Alan, you're throwing around terms like agent provocateur.
Right.
There's absolutely no evidence that this individual functioned as an agent provocateur, and the mere fact that the president can call for and receive an investigation of what is to all appearances a perfectly legitimate investigation just shows why you shouldn't have this in the first place.
No, I don't agree with
Jeff, but Jeff, I mean, if there's no there, what's the harm in having an investigation?
Well,
What to settle it once and for all?
That's like saying, well, if you have nothing to fear, isn't it okay if the FBI searches your home? I mean, the act of the FBI investigating has a chilling effect on people who are involved. It is deeply disruptive. It is time-consuming. It is scary. It is not something that people should ordinarily expect. And just because it's ultimately, the FBI is ultimately vindicated doesn't mean that you should have an investigation in the first place.
You're assuming, without any evidence, that there was a legitimate basis for putting an undercover agent into the campaign and having him had contact with some of the campaign aides. That may turn out to be the case, but I certainly don't assume that. There was no judicial intrusion. There was no warrant. This is just a decision that was made, and I think we're entitled to be assured that they were not inserted, he was not inserted for an illegitimate purpose. We know that agents aren't always passive. Once they're inserted, I've had a lot of experience with this in ordinary cases, they begin to do things beyond just collecting information and listening. Listening usually involves a two-way conversation. And I'd like to know, and I think the American public would like to know, what the basis was. Was it legitimate? If it was, let's put it behind us. But if it wasn't, let's know that.
Saying that he was inserted into the campaign, it makes it sound as if, he had an office in Trump Tower. I mean, it sounds like he met with Papadopoulos, Carter Page, and I guess Sam Clovis in some capacity,
right.
Overseas with Carter Page, according to reporting by the New York Times and the Washington Post, and also with Papadopoulos, and basically asked questions that didn't seem to get many really answers.
Well, we don't know that. All we know is that he was sent to have contact with people in the middle of a campaign. Now, I have to tell you, if this had happened to Hillary Clinton, the ACLU would be jumping up and down the way they did when I was on the board of the ACLU, when undercover agents were put into the anti-war movement, into civil rights movement. All they were there was to listen, into Muslim churches. Civil libertarians are generally a little bit suspicious when undercover agents go just to ask questions, and I think we as civil libertarians ought to be suspicious of this. Allay our suspicions, and then we'll be fine.
But Jeff, I mean, it didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, George Papadopoulos, according to all the reporting, had already spoken to an Australian official, which is what got this on the radar of the FBI.
Right. This was a legitimate investigation.
You don't know that.
I mean, you have no evidence that it wasn't.
Let's find out.
There was ample evidence of collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. That's what this whole investigation was about. So the idea that now the investigation has to be investigated, it just shows what happens when the president takes control of an investigation of him.
So now what you're saying is there was already evidence of collusion, so it was legitimate to put an informer in the FBI to see if, A, there was enough evidence to warrant further investigation, maybe to ask some hard and provocative questions that would get them to give incriminating answers. That does sound like a pretty fulsome investigation. I want to know what the evidence was. No judge has found probable cause. I think the American public has to be assured that there was a basis. It's not enough for Jeffrey Toobin to say there was collusion already at that time. I want to know what the facts were that justify that.
Well, hold on, Professor Dershowitz, let me ask, some former FBI agents, I saw an op-ed piece by Asha Rangappa, who's also appears on CNN, were saying that this may have been actually a way to protect the campaign.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Had they sent FBI agents to go talk to George Papadopoulos, to talk to Carter Page, that could be seen as more provocative than having some professor or whoever this person was meet, privately with these people.
When they sent agents into Martin Luther King during the Kennedy campaign, they said they were doing it to protect Martin Luther King from the influence of communists. They always say they're doing it to protect the good people from the bad people. That may be true. Let's get the facts. I'm not willing to accept an assumption that law enforcement is always legitimate, that without judicial oversight, that what they do is always correct. I want to apply the shoe on the other foot test. If this had been an intrusion into the Hillary Clinton campaign, would people be saying the same thing, or is this special lack of concern because it's Donald Trump? I just want to be sure.
Are you just sucking up to law enforcement?
Well, I am not sucking up to law enforcement, but the questions Alan has about this case, he could raise about absolutely any FBI investigation.
And I do.
And you do. And is there a presidentially directed investigation of the FBI agents in those cases? The answer is of course not, because what's going on here is that Donald Trump is trying to destroy this investigation. That's what's going on here, not any sort of legitimate inquiry into whether the FBI
Well, if he is, he's not doing a good job. This won't destroy the investigation. It won't derail the investigation. We'll just get some facts. If you're right, we'll all be satisfied.
Right. And if your apartment has nothing to fear, it's okay if the FBI searches the place.
Well, and I'll throw that back at you. Then why was there anything, you can say they had nothing to fear of having an FBI agent intruded in a campaign. Privacy is important. Privacy is a legitimate concern, whether you have something to hide or not.
Professor Dershowitz, Jeff Toobin, thank you very much. Good discussion. Much more ahead. More of tonight's breaking news, claims of campaign spying, demands for investigation. So much jargon, it makes you want to hear from someone who, directed the entire U.S. intelligence apparatus. Oh, we have that person. James Clapper weighs in next. Also an update on the incredible images out of Hawaii. Those are live pictures of volcanoes spewing lava, forcing evacuations, creating a whole new